Drew Hendricks here. I'm the host of the Legends Behind the Craft podcast. Today, we have Bianca Harmons joining us. How's it going, Bianca?
Going great, Drew. Excited to be here.
Yes, today we have Katarina Bonde on the show, the owner and winemaker of West Wines. How's it going, Katarina?
Going great. It's a beautiful day, topping barrels today here at West Wines.
Oh, that's fantastic. So, Katarina, West Wines, you're located up in Dry Creek Valley?
That's right. Absolutely.
Give us a little background. How did you get into the wine industry?
Well, both my husband and I have had, a long passion for wine. Already at university, we did classes in winemaking from a consumer perspective, learning what would you do if you were to make wine. And we didn't really understand much of it because we had never seen a winery. But we, went down to various places, France, Italy, and checked out wines. And then we moved to Seattle in the early 90s and started checking out all the wines in Washington, Oregon, California, and really fell in love with the wine industry here.
And you're originally from Sweden?
Yes, exactly. So we came from Stockholm.
When did you come over from Sweden?
That was in 93. So we started, we moved to Seattle, worked in the tech industry, had two small kids. In the weekends, we would love to go down here. And we actually came upon Dry Creek Valley in particular, which was very undeveloped at that time, purely family wineries. Healdsburg was an incredibly cute little town with the square. The plaza only had buildings on three sides and a big brown dirt field on the fourth. Today is completely different. It's really wine industry and entertainment and a destination for people coming here.
Yeah, the first time I was in Healdsburg was in the mid-90s. It was a very different town back then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So West Wines, how did West Wines begin?
We did not intend to create the winery. We actually, as I said, we came down to Healdsburg. We thought it was a lovely place. We met some people here that took us on fun excursions, and they would make some wine in their backyard. So we said, hey, let's get a small place, 2-bedroom cottage. We can have, a row, 2 vines. We'll come down in the weekends and we'll do this thing too. Just make, a barrel of wine every year. This is going to be so cool. And we can just continue to do our jobs in the tech industry. So then I sent my husband shopping and he came back with 30 acres of Chardonnay, a couple of barns. And I'm like, okay, where's the cottage? And who's going to manage the 30 acres of vines? So that's how it started.
It was already purchased at this time. He'd already purchased it. It was like the deal was.
Yeah, well, I mean, he hadn't signed it, but it was like, okay. And I'm like, okay, let's do this, but we need to find a place to live. So then we found another piece of land, beautiful. So the first part is where we now have our tasting room, and it's down on the valley floor, beautiful, right now next to Dry Creek.
Mm-hmm.
We're also up much higher up on the west side of the valley, up on a ridge, and that's where we have Cabernet today. And we bought that land so we could also build a house and live there, and that's where we live now. Mm-hmm. But we didn't really know what we had gotten ourselves into, because loving wine and being a good consumer and knowing about various grapes from drinking them is different from managing a vineyard. So I still remember walking around with a vineyard manager the very first time, and I innocently said, well, so what could go wrong with the grapes? Oh, well, there's phylloxera, there is red rust, black rust, there is frost, there's hail, there's, aphids and this and that. And I'm like, whoa.
So nothing could go wrong. Absolutely nothing.
So he said, oh, it doesn't all happen at the same time. Okay. So that's where it started. We started then deciding, okay, what if we now are going to have a winery? What's our focus? What's going to be what are we going to do with this? What do we want to be known as if we have a winery? And I have always had a passion for Bordeaux wines. I was mesmerized decades ago when I found, I could drink a Bordeaux that had 30, 40 years of age. And I thought, this is fantastic. How do you create this other than just waiting 30, 40 years? What's actually in that? So I then decided, okay, I have to learn this. And we hired a winemaker so I could start, so we could start making wine. I was learning alongside. I started taking classes at UC Davis. I did a winemaker certificate there. And I took, I let that take some time. I, still had my full-time job. So I was doing this like one class, per semester and just taking it slowly. But it was great,
That's amazing to have a full-time job and go back. I mean, few people.
Yeah.
It's my dream to go back and get a certificate, but the likelihood, it's very inspirational to have that happen.
This was before online classes. So you either physically were there or you were sent this enormous package with CDs that you would sit and listen to. And it was hard to not fall asleep, I can tell you that much.
Yeah, it's not like a good podcast.
Nope. This is so much better.
When was the first vintage of West Wines?
99. We started right away to create the Cabernet. That was my dream. And that's how we started experimenting to see what does it take, and learning over the years at what bricks do you need to harvest the grapes? What acidity are you after? What sugar are you after? So that you can keep aging this wine for a long time. We've found that we typically have to harvest maybe a little earlier than other Cabernet growers. We are definitely aging in barrels, French oak barrels, for 2.5 years. So we're doing a number of steps to get a wine that has a lot of preservatives. And the preservatives are natural because obviously it comes from the alcohol itself, from the tannins in the grapes, the tannins in the barrel, etc. So it's been experimentation. And I was very lucky initially. I had Julia Ayan Tosca was our first winemaker. Wow. And after her, Phyllis Tsusunis, both excellent female winemakers. So, and now with me, we've only ever had female winemakers at West Wines.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Awesome. I know that one of your passions in making the wine that you really wanted to talk about was the longevity, your barrels, how you craft it for decades. I know that that's a big piece to you and important to you. Do you want to share on that?
Yeah, I just find it fascinating that the wine continues to evolve in the bottle, that there's so much that happens, that every year, I can have a wine where I have 24 bottles, and let's say I pull one every year, and it's going to be different every year. And if you start off with the right ingredients, so to speak, you will have a wine, especially with grapes like Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, those long aging grape varietals. You can keep going for decades. We still have actually a couple of cases of the 99. And it's amazing. It's this beautiful old lady, not that much tannins left, obviously. There's still beautiful fruit. You have leather, you have some of the figs and dates that come with that a little older flavor profile, but still kind of spunky. It's great. And I love that.
That's amazing. So in 99, the original winemaker shared your vision for these wines of longevity.
Yes, exactly. We started with that. And this wine, of course, it took us 6 years before we thought it was good to bring out. And this has always been, this one discussion between my husband and I. Okay, are we there yet? Because he's looking at us building up all this inventory. And of course, he wants to sell it. And I want to hold on to it till it's perfect. I want to do 2.5 years aging in oak barrels. Then I want to lay the bottles down for another 3 years or so, making sure that they are more perfect than they are just right after bottling.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of inventory to build up. So we've always had this tug of war between us. And that.
And that's kind of unusual, though. A lot of especially in the United States, where people just release the wines and say, it's up to you to sell them. You see that a lot in Spain, though. They'll hold the wines until they're ready. It seems like you almost take that more of a European style of waiting until the wines are ready.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also a lot of people here may not have the right place to store the wines, because I know a lot of people in Europe will buy wines young in cases, but then they will store them away in their cellar. Most houses there have good, cool cellars where you can store the wine. So in a way you can say, well, I do the work for our customers. I store it for them so they can pick it up when it's really great and ready to drink. And we also make sure that we have on hand at least, maybe 7-8 years back of Cabernet that our customers can come and get a work. You can do a tasting, maybe a vertical tasting. So you can come to us and taste the Cabernet from 06 or 08, 09 and see, oh, that's what the wine would taste like if I kept my wine for 15 years.
That's a rare thing in the Napa, Sonoma County is being able to actually experience these. A lot of these wineries have older wine that they've kept a few cases of to sell, but to actually be able to go and taste wines from that long ago.
Yeah, what we do is
not
we
common.
we have certain events where we get enough of a group together that we can open a full bottle and do vertical tastings, and that's a great way to experience it. And I always encourage people to try to find a small space in their house where they can continue to store wine. I mean, you can get a small wine fridge, for example. So it's
depending
really
on
fun.
where you live, a closet, sometimes a dark closet.
I mean,
good.
preferably down underground is the best because then you have very even temperature.
Yeah. Fantastic.
So talk to me about the evolution of West wines between the different winemakers. Have you kept the same house style, or have you seen your wines evolve over the last 20 years or so?
So what we've done is we have broadened the portfolio. We started out creating the Cabernet line because I just knew this was going to take quite a time. So then we also have been making Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, and one of my absolutely favorite white grapes, Viognier. I love that beautiful flavors of exotic fruit, but yet creating a very dry wine from it. And then I make blends, a typical Bordeaux blend with Cabernet and Merlot, sometimes Malbec, Petit Verdot. I have been doing a little bit of what I call my tribute to Italy, combining Sangiovese and Cabernet. And also recently, I did a Cabernet Malbec blend, more in the Argentinian style. So doing a little bit of a portfolio where you can get different expressions that you can attribute to various places.
Absolutely.
And then, of course, one of my favorite projects was when we were starting to create our Blanc de Blanc, our sparkling, made from Chardonnay. So I spent a year trying all sorts of different French Blanc de Blanc to figure out what style we wanted. And each time my daughter came to visit, and she was saying, "Oh, I only have to drink champagne every time I visit." For you.
I know, right? My favorite.
Oh, yeah. Well, she loves champagne, so it's good. So that's kind of the evolution, trying different wines that still adhere to our European profile. And I don't make all these different wines every year. I rotate a bit, and then sometimes I come up with a new idea, like trying to make more of an Argentinian wine. Came after visiting a number of winemakers down in the Mendoza area in Argentina. So there has to be a little bit of experimentation because otherwise, this would be not boring, but not as fun. It's never boring because you always have, each vintage is so different. We have different rainfall, temperature, whatnot. And after fermentation, and we start that aging in the barrel. And that's the fun part. I cannot make two vintages that are the same. Because
that is the cool thing
really
about wine. It's really hard to, you strive for some sort of house style and consistency, but there's so many influences with the weather and the growing conditions and just harvest in general that makes it almost impossible to get the exact, you can see siblings, but you never really get identical twins.
Yeah, no, that's exactly the same.
So I want to ask you, Katarina, speaking on all of the European styles of wine that you've been making, and you're from Sweden. So talk to me. Is the wine region in Sweden? Is there?
Yeah, this is a great question. Of course, Sweden is not a big wine manufacturing country. There are grapes growing in southern Sweden. It's primarily hardy varietals, Riesling, Solaris. And it's hard because, a number of seasons is really wet. So it's not that easy to get a great harvest. It takes a lot of passion to grow wine in southern Sweden. I know I visited several of the wineries there, and there are some great wines, but I would say they will much more often come across a vintage where it's so hard because it started raining hard before harvest, or,
They're doing a lot of Bottiger style wines.
Not really.
Or
More,
no?
no, I would say you get more ice wine because you have the benefit of getting frost and snow. So on the
Interesting.
third side, it's
So
more
like
getting
Canada.
into, ice wine. Really,
Yeah.
really great products, I will say. Several of them beautiful. But the thing with Sweden is that there are so many people that are knowledgeable about wine. There's a huge organization with some 25,000 members in a country with 10 or 11 million people. That is called Munschenkerna, and they have education. You can get different levels of certification. They have every small village and city in Sweden has a chapter, and Sweden actually has twice as much wine consumption per capita as the US.
Oh, that's amazing. Now,
Wow.
do you
Yeah.
export your wine over to Sweden?
We do. Not a lot, but
Mhm.
it's really fun to have a small export to your home country.
Hmm.
And Sweden is a little different. There is a monopoly that sells to consumers. We can sell directly to restaurants, but we cannot sell to consumers. So that has to go through the monopoly.
Okay.
So that's a different style or a different type of channel than we're used to here. We
Yeah.
can't just set up a tasting room.
Mhm. Yeah. What percentage of your wines are exported?
It varies a bit, about 10%. We have a couple of different channels. So it's not just that monopoly. We have restaurants and other places too, but it's predominantly Sweden. We're too small to export anyway. So
Sure.
this is more because we know that market, and I know they are great wine lovers, and I know that this style of wine
Mhm.
will work.
Sure. No, for your sales in general, like what percentage are sold directly to consumers versus through the 3-tier system?
We sell all our wine directly to
Oh,
consumers.
really? Okay.
It's-
So everything
yeah,
except for just that
yeah.
small chunk exported.
Yeah. So of course, lots of visitors coming in from all over, not so much during the pandemic, but
Mhm.
people are coming back again.
Yeah,
And
they're
then we
coming
have
in
our wine.
droves. I was up there just a little while ago, and it is,
Yeah.
it was
It's
gangbusters.
great. Yeah, it's great. It's great. And then, of course, we have a wine club and online sales. So, many people who come to visit, then they go back home and then they can order. We can ship to most states. But, people come back and they visit again, and they want to, our tasting room is right next to our vineyards. So you can sit outside a couple of steps from the vines. And if anyone is interested, I'm always eager to talk about everything from how the vine grows to how we make the wine. And a lot of our staff happily takes people on vineyard walks. And so it's a great place to visit.
No, that's great. Now, and so coming out of the pandemic, every winery kind of made adjustments. How did you guys kind of adapt through the pandemic and then as you're emerging from it?
Well, during the pandemic, like everyone else here in Sonoma, we had to be closed. I think it was like 6 months in
Mhm.
2020 and 6 months in 2021. And of course, that's hard. You're trying to keep some of the staff on board.
Mhm.
You're trying to come up with activities to do. We did a lot of online tastings.
Oh, yeah.
I did trivia sessions. We did online tastings for companies who had their employees sitting at home. I did vertical tastings. We would ship out these older bottles and then go through all these different vintages. So that was actually quite fun to do. Even had Alibaba with, a ton of managers throughout the US and in China. I did this huge tasting for 60 people
Oh,
that
wow.
called in from all over the world, actually.
Oh, wow. That's a great pivot. So you shipped out the wines and then you sort of had a virtual tasting and
Yeah.
and a company bonding experience.
Yeah, exactly. So we couldn't ship any wine to China. So they,
Mhm.
they could just listen in. but everyone else got the wine shipped to them. And some of them had gathered in someone's home. So they were 3-4 people together. And and then I would also do some fun quizzes. I like to do it, make it fun. So we would have quizzes about, do you know who the parent is of Cabernet Sauvignon? Where do you think the Syrah is grown? Like trivia things. And they would be competing against each other, different factions from the company. And then sometimes it was just birthday parties. I would have a family, someone's turning 75. They want to celebrate grandma. They're sitting in 5 different locations in the US. They can't travel. So we would do a fun celebration. I would show them how to saber a champagne bottle. We would do things like that.
That's awesome.
And I would have to make sure I wasn't pointing towards. I did that once. I kind of pointed to the screen. I almost damaged my laptop. So
did any of these things stick now that we're kind of moved on into 2023?
Not so much anymore. I was going to say 2022, that, we still had some of that happening. I think just like myself, we're all a little bit tired sitting in front of a screen. Yeah. It's great to jump on a screen when you have no other avenue, but people like to come in person. I mean, now and then there's someone who says, wow, we can't get everyone together. And of course we'll do that, but I'm going to say it's more rare now than it was back then.
We had a few guests on the show that really went into those kind of virtual corporate tasting environments, and they're still pushing that. I do think you could do in-person trivia at your tasting room.
Yeah. If you come over Easter weekend, we're going to have a quiz walk in the same vein, but now it's real. So you walk through our entire vineyard. We will have fun questions, both for kids and adults, and you can walk through the vineyard, get some, funky prices when you get back, and then you can have your tasting. So if you're an adult, you taste wine. If you're a kid, you taste apple juice and jelly beans.
That's nice.
So you can do trivia, in person too, of course.
It's all about making the experience when you visit. When you visit
and that's really what I think wine is about. You can drink wine on your own, but I think wine, if you go back through history, is something that you share with other people. You sit around a bottle of wine, you talk about that wine, and interestingly, you will start talking about other wines that you've had, other experiences. And when you think about a wine, you often think about where you were when you first drank it, where you were sitting, who you were with. So yeah, wine is about experience.
Very good. Talking about the experience. So you come from a tech background, and the experience in tech is oftentimes very different than in wine. How do you manage the two worlds between tech and wine?
It's a good question. Well, I think, initially this whole idea of building up a whole library of wines that we couldn't release until after 5-6 years. I guess that comes from a background where you build products and you have to invest to get the product you want. You decide this is what we're building. We're aiming it for this type of audience. And you just have to believe that audience is going to be there and that your product is going to have a market. So that's how we started. So I think that comes from my product background and running companies where the product was the main thing, and you were building it first before you even maybe had an audience. So I think there's a commonality there for me. And then, of course, making wine is, of course, a lot of science. You have to know about you're analyzing the grapes. You need to understand when they're going to be picked. You need to analyze what's going on throughout fermentation, throughout the aging in the barrel. You need to understand why a wine spoils and how to make sure it doesn't. But then there's also the marketing, which has to do with creating an experience for someone. And that's the same thing in the tech industry. There are lots of products in the tech industry that, of course, we don't need as humans, but we love to use them. And that's the whole marketing. And it's the same thing with wine.
A lot of parallels there, because wine's necessary, but it's not a need to have. Much like a
Yeah,
lot of tech, it enhances your life and enhances your whole experience, but it's not like as much as we think it is. It's not water.
I know. There's a lot of water in it, but yeah. And put me on on this island and nothing else to do. I'd rather have cheese and wine than water, of course. But no, so exactly, you have that creating a sense of what you can, who you can be, what you can do when you're using the product. I think that's something that is similar here.
There's some differences too in the pre-show we were talking about contracts.
Yeah, I know. So you're in the tech industry, and there are so many lawyers involved in the tech industry. I mean, you know that regardless if your company is doing well or poorly, there will be lawyers involved, and they will be paid whether you get paid or not. And so the contracts are, thick. I mean, you have inches of stacks of paper when you're creating contracts in the tech world. Well, if you're in the wine business in particular, as growers in a valley where everyone knows each other, it may just be a handshake. You just, decide on a price, a tonnage, and everyone knows that if it's if the yield is small, then, everyone's not going to get exactly what they wanted. So then everyone gets a little less. And if you're going to have a great year, then you'll find a couple of other buyers, or some people may take more than they initially expected. And there may be a piece of paper, one page, definitely no lawyers involved. So that's really a huge difference, in particular if you're in a more of a small scale environment like Dry Creek Valley.
Over the last 20 years, have you seen that? Like, I think a lot of people wax nostalgic about how it used to be, but do you still see that whole handshake kind of referral business going on in 2022?
I would say it's a mix. When you deal with, there will be contracts too, absolutely. So I'm going to say, and for me, I use a lot of our grapes myself, of course, but we do sell some grapes too. We grow a lot of Sauvignon Blanc, and I don't make Sauvignon Blanc every year, as an example. So we will sell a lot of that, and sometimes it's a contract, but it's still often it's an email. What do you say? Do you have something for the fall? I just had an email conversation like that. Can you get me in on 10 tons of Sauvignon Blanc? What's the price? And it's, and of course, if you don't honor someone's request, that will be remembered a year later. And we're all in this valley. It's not like you can take your vineyard and go.
That's true. That's true.
So you have to pick and choose, right?
Yeah.
Can't give in to everybody, or, No.
So it's, I think we know who we can do business with, who is a good person, who pays their bills and who doesn't, which is important.
Yeah, you mentioned not making Sauvignon Blanc every year. What are the deciding factors on whether you choose to make it or not?
It's because I like to focus and have one or two white wines per year. So I rotate between making Chardonnay, Viognier, Sauvignon Blanc, and then our sparkling we tend to do every second year. Okay. So that's kind of focusing on, one or two wines at the same time. And that's the whole reason. And it's not necessarily because I look at them and I say sometime in September, let's do this. It takes a little more planning than that in terms of your, tanks and barrels and what you're going to press and what you're going to pick. And like we just talked about, are you going to sell, excess grapes?
Are you making a Viognier every year?
Almost. There has been a few exceptions, but almost. Like I said, it is my favorite grape.
That's interesting. So the decision's made almost before the grapes are ready. It's not like you look at the grapes and go, okay, they're not Western.
Well, I'm going to say I make the decisions in the summer. So we know enough about the harvest and the grapes and everything. And, the whole, it's a puzzle, of course, between what you make, what you're going to sell, etc. Yeah. And then also a little bit looking at, of course, because the hard part is that grapevines take, 4 or 5 years before you get a real good harvest. And then you're going to grow that varietal for decades. But people's, the trends in what people like to drink, that fluctuates more often. And that's a bit of a problem if you're a grower. So suddenly, Chardonnay was a big thing. And now, who wants to drink a Chardonnay? That's so, untrendy. Now it's all going to be Sauvignon Blanc or something else. And we can't, the plants are there. So we have to figure that out. And I think for us, it's about being consistent in the type of wine we make.
Mm-hmm.
I like to make sure that the white wines are crisp and slender, and try to make sure we come back to that every year, every vintage.
Yeah, you brought up an interesting point about how it's 4 to 5 years out, and then there's consumer trends. How do you draw the balance between your vision for the wines and what consumers want?
We have the luxury of not being a gigantic winery.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to sell wines in millions of cases around the world, you really have to pay attention to trends.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a small winery where you are focusing on a certain group of people who like a certain style of wine, you can afford to be more product-centric and not market-centric. It's almost the same thing as it is the same thing in other industries too. So yes, I mean, there is a slight fluctuation over time, but those are longer cycles.
Yeah.
So we don't really give in to trends.
No,
I stick to my product.
Mm-hmm. And give us an idea of your production. How many cases are you producing right now?
So right now, 2,500 cases. It fluctuates a little bit.
Uh-huh.
The pandemic has been making us all wonder a little bit about, how is the consumer behavior going to change?
Mm-hmm.
When we didn't see any visitors, of course, sales were down. There was a lot of articles about everyone was sitting home and drinking boatloads of wine. But people sitting home drinking boatloads of wine, they get it off more the discount online wine stores. They don't seek out small producers that they haven't heard about before. So right now, I'm going to say we're a little bit, still looking at, are we going to be back at the levels we were?
Mm-hmm.
Should we, increase production again? Where are we going to be? We're still not quite out of the, we may be out of the general pandemic in terms of, how fast the virus spreads. But I think consumer behaviors haven't come back to where they were before.
There's definitely a lot of uncertainty out there right now, consumer behavior.
Yeah.
Talk to me about your vision, like what your vision for West Wines, if it comes to fruition over the next 10 years.
So obviously, over the next 10 years, we will be releasing wines that I have made over the past, in the next 6 years, we'll be releasing wine that I made in the past 6 years.
Yeah, so
for one. I'm going to continue to experiment, probably. I'll create a few more blends. I have a few that I'm thinking of right now, and I haven't quite, landed there yet. But I think that's blending in the cellar, having your, creating wines where you finish the wine separately in separate barrels and letting them age for a couple of years to see where are they going, and then see, okay, what type of blend is going to make a certain impact and change in style from what I've done before. That's really exciting. And
it is.
And I'm usually inspired by my trips to other wine countries. Like I said, going to Argentina, really going through, meeting with a number of winemakers, trying to understand how they do it. And then, of course, when I make a wine.
What was your takeaway from your Argentina trip?
Oh, it was amazing. Fun to see how Malbec, how different it is there than what it is in France. I mean, Malbec means bad beak in French. And in Bordeaux, it really is a wine that often doesn't mature enough. It doesn't, you don't really make a wine 100% Malbec. In Argentina, with a different climate, that grape tastes differently. And, but it was amazing to see how huge their wineries are. I visited a small, so to speak, vineyard or winery And they're like 20,000 cases, and that's pretty much the smallest you can find there. Most of them are gigantic. They make, 1 million cases of wine. It's much bigger scale. And comparing that to going to Chile, I've done some winery visits there too. And it's interesting to see how they have more the struggle that the country itself didn't grow up with a wine tradition. Argentina had more of European influence early on, so their food and everything was more attuned with wine. Chile had a much longer history of just exporting their wines, which is changing. So there's a lot of fun, interesting wine to, speaking about something that I don't know if I'm going to do, but I was excited about tasting the Carmenere in Chile, which is that sixth grape.
Yes, the long lost Bordeaux
in Bordeaux.
variety.
Yeah, the lost Bordeaux grape that grows there, which, some of those things, maybe trying on a grape that isn't as prevalent here and see what we could do with it could be exciting.
Yeah, I would love to taste some Carmenere.
Yeah, and I think now we were speaking about this whole, the experience. How do we continue to give an experience that is both fun but also a little bit educational? We were doing all these fun online quizzes and different sessions, and to see how can we create that at the winery in the tasting room. So I think we'll see more of that. I think people want more of that.
Yeah, for sure. Now, you mentioned your daughter visits and was drinking Chardonnay. Has your family got the wine bug? Are they joining in on the?
Are not yet joining us in creating the wines. They're certainly drinking them. My daughter has married a French guy who hails from Burgundy, so he's very much in love with wine too.
Okay.
And our son.
What does he think of your wine? The French are pretty particular.
Thank God he loves the wine. Otherwise, I don't know if we could have let him into the family. And I created a special vintage Chardonnay 2021. It's called Chardonnay Alix. And Alix is my first grandchild. She's 18 months now.
Oh.
And so I have and of course, but still in the barrel, I have a Cabernet vintage waiting at some point to be released with her name.
Oh, that's going to be awesome. She'll be able to 21st birthday.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's fantastic. So, Katarina, as we're wrapping down here, I always ask, because you have this huge tech career, huge wine career, how do you stay motivated?
Well, I think one thing that helps is that I'm always curious about things. I love to learn things, so I love to read up on whatever I'm going to do. I want to know the details. I want to be knowledgeable. So this whole thing of finding out more about other parts of the world, how they make the wine, what can we impart here? And then from the tech side, I think sometimes it's really good to kind of switch your brain over into a completely different area. And take away things from there. Like I said, I take away a lot of the product first activities from the tech sector, making me stay focused on, okay, we're going to do our things. Just because someone comes in and says, oh, why don't you make Zinfandel? No, there's lots of people making Zinfandel here in Dry Creek Valley, and they're great. And I'll just bring my own bottle of Cabernet, and I exchanged that for a bottle of Zin with one of my winemaking friends here. So it's that part of staying focused. And I think also the other, when I'm dealing with my tech companies, I work with a number of assignments. I am on some technology company boards, and I think I'm passionate then too. I think that's one part of my that's who I am. I need to be passionate about something. I can't work with a company just to do it. It has to be some part of me that says, wow, this is amazing. This is so fun.
For sure. That pursuit of knowledge, it drives me for sure.
Yeah, that was been really fun to listening to all your previous podcasts.
Oh, thank you.
What a library.
Katarina, so where can people find out more about West Wines?
Well, they can go to our website, westwines.com, and you can pretty much find everything you need to know about us, and you can book a visit, you can buy wine, you can read a little more about our story, and then contact us. So that's probably the best place to start. Please come and visit.
Oh, absolutely. Well, Katarina, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you,
It's been a real
Katarina.
pleasure.
Well, thank you, Drew. Thank you, Bianca. This has been really fun.
You have a great day. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Legends Behind the Craft podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.